Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about how to recognize manic behavior. Mania is a state of elevated energy, mood, and behavior. And a lot of the time, it's seen in those with bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and people who've taken certain drugs and medications. And while these feelings present in mania can be positive, energetic, even euphoric, they may also manifest more negativity as emotions like irritation, anxiety, and grandiosity. The mania can range from a very mild version, it's called hypomania, to a very severe version, which is regular mania. In its most extreme, mania can trigger delusions, violence, and an increased risk of suicide. So, depending on the cause, a manic episode can last anywhere from several days to several months, and it will typically increase in severity and the level of agitation as it progresses. Now, the milder version of mania is more likely to be associated with positive outcomes like increased productivity, greater feelings of optimism. However, the impulsive behaviors associated with a manic state can lead to substance abuse, gambling, unnecessary risks, poor financial decisions. There's all kinds of weird stuff that people do in a manic state. What's interesting is hypomania is the lighter version, which those people can actually usually maintain a job. Many lose jobs impulsively. However, most of these people can work. It's the ones that have regular bipolar mania when it's untreated, when they're not on medication and it's not being treated. Those people often lose their freaking mind and have a very hard time trying to make a living. Hypomania literally means under mania, and it's a temporary state of positivity and productivity that lasts for about 4 days. While hypomania results in noticeable changes in a person's behavior and energy, it doesn't reach the same severe shifts in mood activity that characterize a full-blown manic episode. So somebody with hypomania may suddenly just clean the entire house or go play golf 50 times because that's what they like to do. They obsess on the things that they love to do. And so their energy gets really high. And it's basically called bipolar 2. When people are hypomanic, it's usually affiliated with bipolar 2, which is the lighter version of regular bipolar. Now, there's also this weird relationship in mania and grandiosity. During a manic episode, someone may experience delusions of grandeur. They think their crap doesn't stink. They think they are the greatest, the smartest thing that ever lived. They think they're the sexiest creature ever to exist on the planet Earth. They have this inflated sense of their own self importance, much like Democratic politicians, and mistaken belief that they are invulnerable and superior to others. The rush of creativity and confidence they feel can be really, heady. And it makes them less likely to voluntarily seek out treatment of mania or hypermania. Hypo. The critical takeaway for those with mania is that your mania is not your creativity. It doesn't define you or make you worthy of respect or love. Also, mania can be cured. While there is no final cure for mania, steps can be taken to reduce the symptoms and avoid triggering an episode. The treatment for mania typically involves a mood stabilizer like lithium or Depakote and an atypical antipsychotic like Risperidone. Psychotherapy is also helpful for people to track their behaviors and keep them in line from when they're going manic and when they're not. They learn coping skills. They learn to many journal, many track their emotions, and they develop healthy lifestyle strategies like sleeping well, exercising, maintaining a healthy diet that lowers the risk of future manic episodes. Because many people will riff off into a manic episode because they've lacked sleep for a long period of time, or they're not exercising and taking care of their health, or they're eating like crap. These things can trigger a manic episode and just snowballs into this enormous problem. Because they can be marked by bursts of energy and higher self esteem and productivity, episodes of mania are thought to be sources of heightened creativity, and some artists credit manic episodes for their best work. Some evidence suggests that bipolar disorder is more prevalent among creative professions. That's because they're waiting for a feeling. And when they get the feeling, that's when they're in their deep, creative, obsessive state. Mania can have a lot of positive outcomes, including goal directed activity, and it can also be dangerous, particularly as severity increases. So, if you get somebody that goes to Vegas and they start gambling and they may win at the slot machine, and suddenly they want to win, 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 win. And Vegas is meant for you to lose, 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 lose. And so what happens is they overbet and they find themselves losing their mortgage to their house. Some who view mania as a source of creativity hesitate to seek treatment out of the fear that it will dampen their artistic experience. But appropriate treatment, usually combining medication with psychotherapy, curbs more dangerous symptoms while ideally continuing to promote the creative expression. So you can ride the wave of the manic episode and be creative, but at the same time, you learn to keep yourself in balance. It's creative people have manic episodes are far more likely than the average person to experience mood swings and depressions. And their depressive symptoms range from mild to severe, and they may last for months out of the year because with bipolar disorder, depression also is a part of it. And that means you go all the way down. So they can't get out of bed. They don't take care of themselves. They don't clean themselves. They don't eat right. They start doing everything that they only when they feel like it and not just do it and then check in with how you feel. If you want to be a healthy person, not depressed, you have to take action and then check in with your feelings. Unfortunately, when people are in a depressive bipolar state, they have a really hard time doing anything unless they feel like it. And that includes their job. And so this can create a lot of tension, especially in relationships. It is very hard to be with a manic person, especially a hypomanic person, because a hypomanic person are very irritable, hard to live with, selfish, obsessed on the things that they like, and they expect everybody to be on board with them, and they think they are the greatest thing that ever happened on the planet Earth, and everybody else is below them during their manic episode. And so it's really hard to live with these turkeys. However, you can, once again, if they're responsible and know they have it. Relationships with mania are a high risk for separation, like divorce. You know, couples best come with, if you got a bipolar or you got a manic episode type of person, that's going to be a hard one to follow because marriage and relationships are all based on trust. You can love someone and not trust them, but when you trust someone, the love grows. So the problem with bipolar disorder is these people are so manic and moody and depressed, and they have so many wobbles that it's very hard to trust them emotionally. And so if you're going to be married to somebody like this and they're not head on going into treatment for their bipolarness, it's going to be a real problem. It's going to be hard to stay with this person because they're batshit crazy. And how can you help someone with this? Well, it can be hard. But if they do not, if the loved one in your life doesn't take accountability for their disorder and their states, their manic states, you're going to have a really hard time staying in a relationship because that means you're the one that has to be the bad guy to say, hey, I think you're getting there. I think you're getting into this manic thing, or you're not making sense, or you're starting to obsess. That if that person understands they have the disorder and you're married to them and you're in a relationship with them and you're keeping them, letting them know, hey, this is a problem. This is becoming. If they don't respect you, they're going to mow you over like a Mack truck, and you're going to get whatever the result is of their manic behavior. But the deal is you can be with somebody like this. However, they have to be willing to hear how it's affecting you and care about how it's affecting you. And they also have to be accountable to you, knowing that you're seeing what they don't want to see about themselves. So the signs and symptoms of mania, manic episodes last for at least 1 week or more. It's important to recognize the signs and symptoms, whether you experience them for yourself or someone you know. It also can feel so good that people often don't think of it, anything's wrong, but family and friends notice. It's often followed by depression. So the phase is characterized by emotional lows, whereas mania causes emotional highs. And a person may be more apt to seek help from healthcare provider during a depressive episode. During their manic episodes, they're so caught up in what they're doing that they have a really hard time listening to anybody who wants to help them bring it down or not crash. The energetic highs that accompany mania may take you to a more active than unusual level. And so your productivity is naturally going to increase because you're obsessive. And you also suddenly have a big idea that goal directed but unrealistic. So you start a business on a whim with all your family's life savings. And suddenly you throw yourself into it as if it's the greatest idea on the planet Earth without a net underneath you. So while you're doing that, you're obsessed on the idea of it, and then you're gravely disappointed and depressed when it doesn't work out the way you want it to. People with mania also may be very talkative. Talkative is more than just speaking quickly. It's almost as if they can't get the words out fast enough. And it's called pressure of speech. And, with that, someone talking to a person in a manic episode, you feel it. It's almost presses you against the wall. These people are very hard. People in a manic state have a really hard time listening. They love to hear their own voice. They love to speak. And when they speak, it's like a machine gun. Also, a lack of sleep. Sleeping may stop, or the person may run on very little sleep with all of that energy and activity during a manic episode. So, people with mania often don't need any sleep at all. And that's hard to understand, but boy, does it have consequences when they actually get out of the manic state. Now they're going to crash and burn. Also, distraction. Racing thoughts during a manic episode may lead you to become easily distracted, and then you start multitasking, and then you have a hard time completing. It also may look like you're taking on numerous tasks and not doing them to completion. Also, then there's this risky behavior. Spending reckless amounts of money during a manic episode is not uncommon. Unprotected sex, gambling, prostitution, drugs, alcohol binges may also occur. Mania is very serious and it's very dangerous. And a person could potentially do something to hurt themselves or someone else. So you got to be really careful, because if you're going to have children and you're going to have manic episodes, if you're not responsible in knowing when you're manic and when you're not, you're going to have some problems raising your kids. You're going to have some problems keeping your kids. And you're sure as heck going to have problems keeping a relationship if you don't take accountability for your behavior. Severe manic episodes also involve psychosis, which is hallucinations and delusions. People may have grandiose delusions about themselves, that they're like the smartest person, the sexiest, the most wonderful spouse you could ever have. You'll never have anybody like me. They're so grandiose. It's almost disgusting. They also believe in ideas like they're spies, they're government officials, they're secret agents, they're God, they're Jesus, they're the devil. They also have delusions of paranoia, which they feel they're being stalked or targeted, or you have done them wrong. And that's another part of this bipolar feature. Many people that are on drugs and drink alcohol to great excess don't realize it, but they have some form of mania going on in their life. And it's really important to understand that because they're taking the drug and the alcohol to manage the mania. They need it in their mind to manage the mania, but what it does is it exacerbates it instead of stops it. Now, this hypomania thing, it also is very common with mania and hypomania that is characterized by sudden mood swings. They make a person feel energetic, wired, euphoric, and then depression can follow a manic or hypomanic episode, but not always. Hypomania is less extreme than mania, but both lead to issues functioning at work and in your personal life. So, hypomanic episodes are less likely to cause noticeable problems. They're just really irritable people that are really hard to deal with. They also don't last as long. A period of hypomania lasts like at least 4 days, so it's not a full week. There's also, if you look at bipolar, it's a mental health condition. It causes periods of high moods, mania, and some people have shifts between high and low moods, which is depression. Genetics, family history, stress, differences in the brain function may cause bipolar. An estimated 2.8% of adults in the United States have some form of bipolar disorder. And it's split equally among men and women. About 4% of the population will experience bipolar disorder. Bipolar 1 typically starts around 25 years old. Symptoms usually show up earlier in life in men than in women. It's kind of like schizophrenia, which is really weird. Schizophrenia will show itself around 18 years old when it goes into full bloom with a male. However, with a female, it may be 28 before schizophrenia goes into full bloom. There are major warning signs. Major. It's important to know the warning signs of mania. You or someone you're with may start driving faster than usual or having agitated mannerisms. It's not always drugs and alcohol that can cause people to look like a drug addict or an alcoholic. It could be a manic state or both. One thing that we learned as the people that to have predictable episodes of mania, that if you can do that, you can manage the disorder. That is a very important part of it. If you can recognize patterns and allow people in your life to give you feedback without activating your own defensiveness, then you can participate in problem solving to manage your bipolar episodes. Realize that early manic episodes can be seductive. Some people prefer it because they feel like they're more open, funnier, and interesting. And the experience can be reinforcing in the beginning. But mania also can lead to extreme agitation or irritability, with the ultimate, and it doesn't feel good. It's important to treat mania and bipolar. A person might be endangering themselves in a manic episode. It is something that has to be treated and can be treated because the risky behaviors lead to losing your job, being kicked out of school, being arrested, being hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital or an inpatient unit. It's also important to know the risk of suicide among people with bipolar is 10 to 30 times higher than the general population. That's very important to understand. The first line of treatment is a mood stabilizer, and that's a long-term mood stabilizer like lithium can prevent the reoccurrence of mania. So it's very important to also understand that antidepressants may treat depression. However, antidepressants use is known to risk mania. So these medications may activate an antidepressant, a manic episode, if you don't use them carefully and under good supervision. That's why you want to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to deal with the medication because they can understand and temper the medication based on how your body's responding. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk more about mania. So come back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about how do we recognize mania. You know, sleep is one of the most important things you need to manage bipolar. Having a consistent sleep and wake time that allows a full night's sleep helps. But it's important to also understand that you need to understand where your psyche gets all caught up in living in fear. People that live in fear, which another word for that would be stress or anxiety, people that have that have a very, very hard time because when you're a stressed out person, it calls for a lot of energy. Fear takes a lot of energy because your brain has to hypothesize all these different outcomes and how you're going to handle them. And when you go down that path, what you're going to do is you're going to limit a lot of your behavior and you're going to trigger depression. So the deal is people that live in fear exacerbate bipolar symptoms like mania. People that live in fear are on the edge of mania at any given time, depending on how worried, how much fear they're experiencing. It is one of the biggest manic trigger that there is. And if you have no sleep, you're going to have a really hard time managing yourself. So once again, hypomania lasts for a few days, like 4 days. It doesn't mean it's a hardcore 4 days. It could be about 3 days, but it's a few days. You know, you're going to usually be able to continue with your daily activities without having to be too badly affected. But other people may notice a change in your mood and behavior, and it can be unpleasant and difficult experience for them to have you around because you were fine just a little bit ago, and all of a sudden you've turned into Godzilla. You know, symptoms of hypomania include how you might feel. You might be happy and euphoric, or a sense of well being. You might be very excited that you can't get your words out fast enough. You might be irritable and agitated. You might feel like everybody's disrespecting you. You may have increased sexual energy. You might feel distracted, like your thoughts are racing or you can't concentrate. You also may have increased self esteem and self confidence. These dudes get really cocky, especially in their manic states. You know, you have to wonder how you might behave. And are you more active than usual? Because that's an indicator you're probably in a hypomanic state. You know, if you're talking a lot, speaking very quickly, if you're being friendly, if you're sleeping very little, spending money excessively, losing social inhibitions, or taking risks, these are all signs that there is a good chance you're in a hypomanic state because it's not your normal state. Everything is extremely bright and loud. Everything inside your head is moving extremely fast. That is what mania is like. You're irritated with everyone because no one talks or does things as fast as you do, and it's amazing but horrible at the same time. It's like you're in your own amazing, colorful world, but everyone else is still stuck in the normal, dull, gray world. And so you feel you're an exception. And that's what happens in this manic state. And when people get into it, they love it. It's addictive. But once again, it can be very destructive to everyone else. Mania itself, the real mania, has a significant impact on your ability to do your usual day-to-day activities. These guys, when they get in this state, there is no way they can be employable. It disrupts or stops them completely. Severe mania is very serious and it often needs to be treated in a hospital. Episodes typically last for a week or longer. And so symptoms include a whole lot of things like how you might feel, once again, happy, euphoric, uncontrollably excited, irritable, agitated, increased sexual energy, confident, adventurous, which is a bigger quality, the adventurous quality. It's almost like you're untouchable. It's almost like you can't be harmed. It's like you think that, your crap doesn't stink. And you can perform physical and mental tasks better than normal, better than everybody else. People in manic states love to put themselves above everybody else. You know, it's almost like if you're in a manic state, like you understand, you see or hear things that other people can't. You can replace other people's thoughts because you know what they're thinking. You know, being more active than usual is another sign. Once again, talking a lot, speaking quickly, not making sense to other people. Also, these guys can be very friendly in this state. They can be very open and just talk to anybody. Saying or doing things that are inappropriate and out of character is also an indicator of a manic state. A lot of these people will start saying and doing stupid things that are very offensive to everybody or certain people, like they'll target a certain person, like their codependent partner. Once again, another indicator of a manic state is they can't sleep or they sleep very little. They start misusing drugs and alcohol. This is another part of the mania. That's something that they have a predisposition to, but that doesn't mean they're always going to do it. But yes, misusing drugs and alcohol, they'd rather do that than take medication. They also start spending money excessively in a way that's unusual. And when they do that, they go all the way. They will, you know, turn over their 401k. They'll get equity out of their house. They'll do all kinds of crazy stuff thinking their ideas are so brilliant. They also lose social inhibitions, and that's a real high indicator of a manic state where they're actively seeking conversations, seeking people, seeking opportunities, seeking things to do that they don't normally do. They also have a propensity to take very serious risks. So if they get behind the wheel of a car, they may drive that car 150 miles an hour and crash it. The deal is that they don't mind taking risks during that state because their mind is so euphoric that it thinks they're invincible. After an episode, you often feel very unhappy, ashamed about how you behaved. You may have made commitments or taken responsibilities that now feel unmanageable. You may find that you ended up married to the prostitute that you slept with. You may have met somebody at the bar that you committed to be in a relationship with, and now all of a sudden you're not wanting to be in a relationship with them. You know, some of these people have only very few clear memories of what happened while they were hypomanic or manic, or none at all. They may actually blank out on what happened during their manic episodes, and that includes hypomania. They often, after these episodes, they feel tired, need a lot of sleep, a lot of rest, end up taking a lot of time off work. And if they have a job after they get back, it's probably doubtful because they take people for granted like crazy because their manic states take so much out of them. They also may feel like they've been hit a reset button, like you're a different person than before the episode. And this is common, where they do not feel like themselves, where they feel like they've lost a part of who they are. And that has a lot to do with guilt and shame. That has a lot to do with the things that they've done that they can't take accountability for. And it's really, it's amazing to me how many people that are bipolar and are manic, especially the hypomanics, that just destroy relationships based on their behavior. They say stupid things, they do stupid things. It's unbelievable. And that's an untreated. If you have mania, you need to know you have it and you need to get it treated. If you're going to be in relationships or if you're going to work at all. Now let's talk about the diagnostic manual for mental health. Mania is a syndrome where a person feels extreme high energy, overly excited, very active, and it's associated once again with bipolar 1. And during that episode, the feelings and the moods can change rapidly, often influenced by the environment. While mania is usually seen as the opposite of depression, the person's mood can be euphoric, extremely happy, or dysphoric, unpleasant and irritable, but yet high energy. And as the mania increases, irritability becomes more pronounced because as they enter into the manic state, they become more disrespectful to others, and others become more disrespectful to them. So here's a simplified version of the DSM-5 when it comes to manic symptoms. A manic episode, now this is textbook, a manic episode is a period of heightened mood. The mood can be either elevated, irritable, or expansive. It's accompanied by increased goal directed activity or energy, and the episode lasts for at least 1 week and occurs for most of the day, almost every day. In some cases, hospitalization may be necessary, and if you experience a period of mood disturbance along with increased energy or activity, and you notice a significant shift from your unusual behavior, then you may be experiencing symptoms of mania. Once again, increased self esteem, grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, where you feel rested after only 3 hours of sleep, more talkative than usual, feeling pressure, flight of ideas, or a subjective experience that thoughts are racing. These are things that we have to keep track of. You have to be able to recognize mania. Another thing is distractibility, where your attention is too quickly drawn to unimportant or relevant external stimuli. So some people will overemphasize and overcompensate on things that distract their attention, like a little kid crying or somebody wanting attention. Then all of a sudden they're going to get all defensive and get real weird when something gets on their radar. They also get very goal directed, either socially at work or school, or sexually, or psychomotor agitation, which refers to purposelessness, non-goal directed activity. So engaging in activities with high potential for negative consequences like overspending, infidelity, and risky investments, those are the most popular ones that people in a bipolar manic state often do. The level of disturbance in the mood is severe enough to significantly affect a person's ability to function in social or occupational settings. And it also requires sometimes hospitalization to prevent harm to yourself or others. You know, it's very important to understand that we have to recognize in real reality what a manic state looks like. So, some people may see themselves as confident, self-assurance has skyrocketed, they assure they're the best person in the industry, destined to become a millionaire. They begin making lavish plans for business expansions without consulting people. And they also throw out the analyzations of the market. Usually, one for a solid 8 hours of sleep. Now they begin to exist on 2 to 3 hours and call that a day. They also spend extra waking hours pacing around, making calls, different time zones, drafting ambitious project proposals. They also dominate conversations. They interrupt others frequently. People start to notice that they seem pressured, and they're like, "Is something wrong with you? Are you okay?" And the person is like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm the best thing I've been. I feel the best I've ever felt." And they often do, but they don't realize that they're destroying everything around them. They often jump from one grand idea to another without completing any particular line of thought. And they are highly convinced that they are right about their grandiose ideas. They have racing thoughts which make it difficult for anyone to follow along with or keep up with the pace of their speech. Their energy is often through the roof in a manic state. They take on more clients, they take on more people, they take on more workload, and then all of a sudden when they crash, they can't do any of it. These are patterns that if someone is bipolar in your life or you are bipolar, you have got to call it out. You need to take this serious because it's affecting every part of your life. You are a roller coaster. That is not something that somebody wants to live on. They don't want to live on a roller coaster. It's a terrible place to live. It's a trap. And you want to know when you're getting on the roller coaster and how to get off it as quickly as possible. Many people love, in the bipolar states of mania, love their credit cards. and they will spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars and lock themselves into all kinds of crazy debt with all kinds of stupid things that they purchased because their grandiosity has to be funded. And so when they get into that state, they just want to spend, 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 spend because they want to create the image that they're always going to be in this manic state and this is who they are and this is who they're always going to be. They want to sustain that as long as they can, and they will sell and buy everything they possibly can to maintain that. It's inflated self esteem, bordering on grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, increased talkativeness, racing thoughts, distractibility, heightened goal directed activity paired with psychomotor agitation, excessive involvement in risky activities without full consideration of the repercussions. If you have a family and children and you go into a manic state and you're willing to mortgage your house, you are a fool. You got to take care of this. If you're going to take on responsibilities that affect other people in your life, you have got to manage a bipolar situation in your life. That's critical. But many people who are bipolar are just waiting and waiting and waiting for the next hit, which is the manic episode. It's really important for us to understand that there's all kinds of ingredients in a manic episode that we have to notice. And I know I've repeated a lot of these over and over again, but I have to say that you as a human being have to learn to identify when this is happening. People who are bipolar often self-destruct. They can't keep in the same patterns. They always are breaking the patterns based on their moods. So these people will join a gym and suddenly they'll be there for the entire week or maybe even a month and they'll go crazy. They'll be there every day. And then suddenly they're not there for another 9 months or 10 months until they hit another manic episode. So a lot of these people do what they're supposed to do, but they wait on their manic episode because it's they're just waiting to get that energy. If you think about depression, depression waits on a feeling. The feeling never comes, so they procrastinate, waiting on a feeling. Bipolar people wait on a feeling. They actually wait on a manic state to clean their house or to get things done that they're supposed to do. And it's kind of sad because they could actually they learn to motivate themselves regularly by doing the right thing for themselves and then checking in with their feelings. They might find a little more balance in their life. It's kind of cool to have a lot of energy. It's kind of cool to feel euphoric. It's great. The brain wants to have that feeling, but the problem is you can't sustain it. And so, people with bipolar think they can sustain their mania for the rest of their life. You can't. It crashes, and then you have to recover. And the recovery depends on how far up you go into your manic state. And if you go way, way up, there's a good chance you're going to go way, way down when it's over because you're going to have burned all that energy in the manic state. So it's very important for us to get a grip on this. Also, understanding how our mania impacts other people's lives is huge because you won't manage it if you have no empathy for its impact on other people. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about how to recognize mania. We've talked about these symptoms over and over and over again. A lot of energy, unstoppable, invincible feelings, mind racing, speaking quickly, strange and unusual behavior, easily distracted or annoyed, not sleeping, regular sleeping patterns, impulsive behavior, intense anxiety. These people, when they're in a manic state, they are intense. Even in a hypomanic state, they are intense. They're intense about everything that they feel. They're intense about all of their obsessions. And God forbid you get in their way. They will mow you down like a Mack truck. People with bipolar disorder often have mixed feelings about their mania. You may have heard stories about artists and musicians with bipolar who made their most creative work while they're manic. It's also common for people to take a massive new projects, like starting a new business, building a house, getting a new job. They feel invincible, and it can inspire you to be more adventurous, but it can also lead to this risky behavior that we've been talking about. Then there's these sudden increases in drug use, in unprotected sex, spending too much money. Even though mania usually feels really good in the moment, it causes problems for people's lives because your integrity is often at stake. Who you are when nobody's looking can be a problem in a manic state. You suddenly are making choices that you regularly would not make. And yet, in the end, you're going to have to be accountable for those choices. And you're going to have to explain those choices. And that's really hard to do. That's why it's so important for people to come to grips with if they have bipolar or not, if they have mania or not. It also can include psychotic symptoms, like they see or hear things, like hallucinations. They speak in a way that seems disorganized or bizarre. They may be fearfully suspicious of people, family members, strangers, organizations, paranoia. A lot of these people go into these paranoid states where they're irritable because they know they're being judged, and they can't stand it. However, they know that it comes with it. That when they're manic, they are out of their zone. They're out of who they are, and they're so euphoric they want to defend themselves staying there. And so they cause a lot. They're a wrecking ball. And they have to be so careful. We have to be so careful in dealing with bipolar manic people because they can do great harm to you because they are so obsessed with their way of being manic that whatever they obsess on, that is what they do. And it may be obsessed on hurting you. Hypomania is less intense from mania. The symptoms are similar, but its impact on people's daily lives is less severe. Once again, these guys are just a pain in the ass to live with because they're an emotional roller coaster. They could flip on you in a second. It's really sad. These guys are disruptive. They're moody, they're foul tempered, they want to manipulate, they guilt and shame. They do all kinds of stupid things, especially to their poor children. But if they can recognize the manic states, they can help everybody around them. Now, how do you deal with hypomania or mania? It can be really difficult, but you really have to get to know your moods, your triggers, and your warning signs. Now, what's really wonderful is people who actually track their moods, their behaviors. That's an important thing to do, their triggers. Also, you want to make a self management plan how to take care of your body, how to take care of your sleep, how to take care of your brain, how to pace yourself. They also need to take practical steps. You know, these practical steps come in many, many forms, and we're going to talk about all that, a little bit later. But the deal is, practical steps means breaking things down into when I have entered a manic state, what entering a manic state looks like, so they can see what that shift will takes place. And they also need to get somebody outside of themselves who can objectively look at them and understand when manic states happen and when manic states don't happen, and what it is that paces them into that manic state. Many people, it's like a volcano, it just blows. Other people, it's a very slow burn over a week or two where they move themselves into the manic state. What's important though is you monitor your mood. You also have to have peer support, and that's a good idea to be in groups of people who have bipolar disorder, so they can help monitor each other. Because if anybody can recognize manic behavior, it's bipolar people, and when they're able to help each other, they are able to better control their disorder. There are many, many, many bipolar groups in every single major city in the world. It is very important if you are a bipolar person to be one of them in a group, because that means you're seriously looking at your disorder and you're seriously seeking people who know what mania looks like. You also may need to enter into some kind of recovery program. And that's important. There are many, many, many recovery programs all over it, whether it's in clinic or out of clinic. It's very important to pursue that direction because, especially if you've had a major manic state, you probably needed to have some kind of supervision at the time. And if you know when you're headed into a manic state, you probably need to know that I don't want to mortgage my house. I don't want to sleep with prostitutes. I don't want to do all this crazy stuff. I don't want to spend all my money. I don't want to quit my job. What I need to do is go into a inpatient treatment center and get serious treatment so that I can get through the manic phase and go back to reality and hopefully manage myself so I don't continue to get into manic phases. You have to monitor your mood, keeping track over a period of time with a diary, with a chart. These are freely available. You can find them on the internet. There's a website called eMoods, which will help you have tracking sheets for your bipolar disorder. You know, there's a lot of these people also, when they get into this manic state, they think they are right about everything. They think they're always right. And they also think they have the greatest intuition where they knew that person was this, or I knew that person was that. I knew this was going to happen. I knew what you were thinking. I knew you were doing this. They think they know everything. They think they can read people's minds because they have this mystical power that they give themselves. They also, oftentimes, once again, you see them as bubbly and their confidence is really high. They may complete things simultaneously that felt like they could never have done that in the past. All of a sudden, they're very effective and they're getting things done like crazy. But you've got to understand the triggers. If you are a manic person, you might notice that certain types of behavior, experience, or situations triggers a manic or hypomanic episode. You also want to look around at the people that are in your life, because if they are walking around you or not interacting with you or avoiding you or doing whatever they can to not face you, there's a good chance, or maybe they're confronting you, there's a good chance you're probably in some kind of a manic episode. You might find that you feel your mood changing after a late night. People that are tired in bipolar oftentimes can move themselves into a manic state. So when your brain is tired, it may actually gain more energy by lighting up and thinking about something that it wants to do, that it obsesses on. Because what mania is very much related to is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So people that have obsessive compulsive disorder understand what mania is, because people that are obsessed, they oftentimes can't be stopped. And that's what this manic stage is like. It's like a speed train. It just can't, it's very hard to get it to stop. It's going to mow down everything in its tracks. But if you understand the patterns, you can help yourself take action and avoid the triggers. What are triggers? Well, triggers are insecurities. Triggers are things that you do that you know you should not do. Triggers are arguments that you may have with people that you love. Triggers may have to do with the feeling that you're going to lose your job. Triggers may have to do with finances. Triggers are always going to have to do with something that anchors you and makes you feel secure. And if it suddenly doesn't feel secure, there's a really good chance you're going to go into a manic episode. You also have to notice the patterns of how you feel and behave before an episode. This includes changes in how well you sleep, your appetite, how you spend money. That's a big deal. Being aware that your mood is starting to change can help you make sure you have support in place. Hey, I feel this thing coming. You know, when you're able to throw up a flag to say, hey, I think it's happening, I think something's coming along, that is huge. You want to be that person. You want to be that person in charge of it. There is nothing wrong with communicating that you have bipolar because that means you're willing to manage it. It's the people that avoid the fact that they're bipolar and wreck everybody's life around them, including their own. You know, you also have to understand that you have to have a management plan. You know, when you're well, you make a plan for what you can do if you start getting into a hypomanic or a manic episode. You can plan how to manage your symptoms and prevent things from getting worse. So when I'm in those episodes, I may limit the amount of meetings that I have. I may limit my contact with my boss. I may limit my contact with my family. I may try to get myself into a state of mind where I'm meditating, where I can figure out and witness what's going on in my brain. You know, it might take a few ideas to find out what works for you. For example, you might make yourself go to bed even if you don't feel tired. You might try to avoid caffeine and alcohol. You might avoid stimulating activities. You might try to remember to eat regularly, even if you don't feel like it. You might avoid noisy, bright, busy environments and go somewhere quiet and calm. You know, do you find calming or soothing activities? This is huge. Do you know how to relax? Do you know how to take deep breaths? Do you know how to pray? Do you know how to meditate? You want to think about how to manage also your finances. Tracking your finances if you're bipolar and you go into manic states is huge. You want to have a budget. You want to track your finances so that you can understand because that can also be a temperature gauge as to when you get into a manic episode. You know, you also want to, when you know you're in a manic episode, you want to postpone making life decisions, especially big ones like divorce. You know, it's huge. These people that make decisions when they're reactive, that is foolish. You want to be responsive. That's what adults do. You also need to avoid situations where you may take part in risky behavior. You know, you also may like driving situations where you may drive irresponsibly. You also may, if you know you're going into a manic episode, you may limit your social contact. Too much social contact can actually trigger you deeper into the manic episode. You also, what's important with manic people, and especially bipolar people, is you want to stick to a routine because you will know when you're getting outside of that routine, that is an indicator that you're getting into a manic episode. Having a routine helps you feel calmer, especially if your mood is high. It helps you feel more stable. It makes you feel like you have more self-control, self-discipline. You know, it's there's a time for relaxing, there's a time for mindfulness, there's a time for hobbies, there's a time for social plans. You know, that's what you want to integrate. You also want to integrate medication and when you take your medication. If you're bipolar, you also have to manage your stress. Stress can trigger hypomanic or manic episodes. You know, it's really, really important to manage stress because stress will kill you. Living in fear is what manic people go through. They go through this idea that they're invincible, and then suddenly, when they get into the depressive pocket, that's when they get even more depressed because they realize how fragile their life really is. You know, you have to look after yourself. That's the biggest part of mania. And if you're going to treat it, you have to take your disorder seriously. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, libsyn.com or voiceamericamedia.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, if you think nobody cares if you're alive, try missing a few car payments. Also, a diva without a place to go is a manic. Also, manic people suddenly have a superpower. Thanks for listening, everybody.